Hello and welcome back to another episode of Notion Bonsai, and in this video today we're going to be doing some chemistry. I'm going to show you how to make your very own lime sulphur that you can use on your bonsai trees. Alright, so before we begin, you may be wondering, what is lime sulphur and what is its uses in bonsai? Put simply, lime sulphur is a mix of lime and sulphur that's put together to create lime sulphur. And in bonsai it has two uses. It can be used as an effective winter wash during the dormant period. We take the lime sulphur and create a dilute solution with water. Personally, I use a ratio diluted to 20:1, but I have heard others use 10:1 or even 30:1. And we take this and mist it on the trees to kill off any insects or fungus that may be laying dormant on the trees over winter. And it can also be used to whiten and preserve deadwood. Now, because we are working with chemicals, safety is extremely important, so I would say only do this if you are trained to do so. You want to wear something like a lab coat or old clothing to protect yourself from any sparks. Wear gloves and eye protection, and if you wish to, you can wear a mask. If you have long hair like I do, you want to tie it up, and you definitely want to do this in a well ventilated area. As you can see, I'm doing this outdoors, or if you have one, you can use a fume cupboard. You just don't want to be breathing in the fumes that comes off of this, and also it does smell like rotten eggs, so if you did it indoors, it could really stink up your house. Now, the supplies and ingredients that I will be using in this video today are a cloth just to clean up any spillages, a ladle, a tablespoon, a large pot. This one I believe is 5 liters, and the total amount of solution that we're going to end up with today is about 3 liters. So you want a good deep pot so that the thing doesn't overflow as we make it. A smaller pot, something for controlled heat. I'm using this hot plate, some raw sulphur powder, and finally some lime as calcium oxide. Now, most of the recipes that I have seen online for making lime sulphur use what's known as calcium hydroxide, also known as slacked lime or builder's lime, but today I'm using this calcium oxide, which is somewhat of a modified recipe. And the reason I'm using this is because calcium oxide does react a little bit more effectively with water, so we do get a faster and more effective chemical reaction. Now, just on a side note before we begin, calcium carbonate doesn't really work for this recipe as it doesn't readily react with water enough to make the lime sulphur solution. The first thing we're going to do, I'm going to take the big pot, put it on the hot plate. Now, for this recipe, I'm going to be mixing the lime, sulphur and water in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 10. So that's 250 grams of lime, 500 grams of sulphur and 2.5 liters of water. So just starting with the water, I'm going to fill this pot with 2.5 liters. And now, just as the water begins to boil, I'm going to turn the heat down just a little bit so that I can keep the water at a half boil. And now I'm going to begin slowly adding the calcium oxide. And you don't want to dump all of this in at once because calcium oxide does react with water. And this reaction is quite vigorous and it's also exothermic. So if I dumped it all in at once, it could react too violently. So that's why I'm going to add all of this 250 grams, 1 tablespoon at a time, until all of it has reacted. So now, once all of the lime has been added, I'm going to take this small pot, and into this I'm going to pour all the 500 grams of the sulphur, and I'm just going to keep this lime on a slow boil. So I'm just going to cut this open with some garden scissors. Just pouring all the sulphur into the pot. And now what I'm going to do with this is ladle out some of the lime water that we have on the boil and ladle it into this pot. And because sulphur doesn't dissolve in water, this is going to form a paste. And now I'm going to slowly add all of the sulphur into this pot with the lime. I've now added all of the lime and sulphur together in this big pot, and I can already see the reaction starting to take place. The white milky lime that was once there before is starting to turn sort of a darkish orange color. So as you can see here, if I ladle some of this out, the solution is going like a dark orangey yellow color. Now I'm going to keep this on a boil for the next 40 to 60 minutes until all of the reaction has taken place. And now as this reaction takes place, I think it's quite interesting to think about how the lime and the sulphur come together to make lime sulphur. What happens is whenever you add lime to water, you create what's known as an alkaline solution. And if you take the sulphur and you add it to an alkaline solution, this allows the sulphur to be able to oxidize, and it breaks down into things which are known as sulfides and polysulfides, but more specifically in our case for bonsai, calcium polysulfides. And this is what's responsible for the insecticidal and fungicidal properties of the lime sulphur. And also, whenever you take the lime sulphur and you paint it on Deadwood, the calcium polysulfides oxidize to things like air and light, and they break down into calcium sulfate, which is responsible for that whiteness that you do see on the Deadwood. And if you look really close on the Deadwood, you will see sort of a powdery substance on top of the wood. That's the calcium sulfate. As it boils over the course of 40 to 60 minutes, you will notice the water level drop. So it's okay just to keep some water nearby and keep topping it up as the water level goes down, just to keep the solution at the same level. So it has been about 40 minutes for me. And as you can see, the solution now has turned this lovely dark reddish orange color. And this is a really good sign that the reaction has been complete. I'm just gonna let this cool down a little, turn off the heat, and I'm gonna put this lime sulphur into some bottles. And the bottles that I'll be using are these plastic 250 milliliter bottles. And you will need to sieve the solution also, because there will be some particles floating around in it. And for this, you can use a metal sieve, some cheesecloth, a coffee filter, or in my case here, I've got this stainless steel sieve with a mesh in the bottom. And between the mesh, which pops out, I've put a little bit of bandage just to act as somewhat of a cloth filter. So I'm just going to take another bottle, that way I don't drip any onto my table. And there we have it. We've just made some lime sulphur. So it is now the following day, and as you can see, we ended up with 7 and a bit bottles of lime sulphur, which is slightly less than I expected. I expected about 10 bottles in total, but from the evaporation of water as it was boiling, I was sort of eyeballing it, adding water here and there to try and get it to the right level. And of course, it wasn't perfect, and our solution is ever so slightly concentrated. If you wish to, you can always dilute it with some water to bring it to the right concentration, or if you accidentally made yours too dilute, you can evaporate off some water. But as it is right now, I'm pretty happy with the result. Now it's time to try this on some Deadwood. So this tree is a little Japanese larch that we worked on. In a previous video, we gave it this crazy contorted bend, but before I bent this tree, I chopped off half of the trunk. And as you can see here, it has a Deadwood feature that spirals around. And now is about the right time that I would like to apply some lime sulphur onto the Deadwood. First here, I'm just going to take some bonsai tweezers, tidy up some of these leaves that have fallen on here. The tree does look quite bare at the moment because it is winter, but whenever spring comes around again, this tree will leaf out and it will look really beautiful. Now just before I apply the lime sulphur, I'm going to take a nylon brush and just brush any dirt or debris that may be on the Deadwood. You don't want to apply lime sulphur onto wood that has algae or dirt on it, as it may not adhere to the wood just how you want it to. I'm going to spray just a little bit of water just to help loosen things up. And now that all the tree has been scrubbed and cleaned, I'm going to pour some of my lime sulphur into this beaker just to see how clear it is. It's also good practice not to use the lime sulphur directly from the bottle you get it from, because you could introduce contaminants and it could oxidize a lot quicker, so your lime sulphur wouldn't last you as long. And when looking at my lime sulphur, it is quite dark and orange, but it is ever so slightly cloudy, so perhaps next time I could filter it maybe a second time just to get out any of the particles that's left over from the reaction. But as it is right now, I'm really happy with it. So just taking my lime sulphur, dipping in a paintbrush. If you are doing this with a paintbrush, I advise using a cheap paintbrush as it can degrade the bristles on your brush. I'm just going to carefully and slowly paint in between the lines of the tree. I'm just trying to ensure that I don't get it on the tree itself. It won't harm the tree that much, but it will just look untidy when it turns white. And you can really just take your time with this. And now, after 24 hours, all the lime sulphur has oxidized on the Deadwood, as you can see the whole way around. I'm really happy with the result. And on that, I'm going to end off this video right here. If you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like in this video. It really helps out the channel a lot with the YouTube algorithm. And let me know down in the comments what you thought of this video. If you yourself have experience in making lime sulphur, do you have any tips for me? Like, how can I get the solution ever so slightly more clear? If you would like to support me and the things that I do on this channel, like making lime sulphur, hit the thanks button down below. And if you would like to stay updated on all the things that I do off camera, please follow me on Instagram. It's at Bonsai, and you'll be able to see all the things that I do on there. But on that, thank you so very much for watching.